Welcome back to Newsfeed PM. Let's get into some business news now. The Trump presidential election victory is expected to shift trade in a multipolar world economy. The 47th president's policies are expected to have huge implications for U.S. trade policy, climate change, tariffs, the war in Ukraine, and electric vehicles. Now, while some of his proposals would require congressional approval, Trump is expected to stick to his promise to put America first. Let's now get some perspective on what a Trump win could mean for African trade and especially South Africa with the Economist Gustav Fourie. Gustav, Trump has floated the idea of a 10% tariff and all sorts of policies coming through. As South Africans looking at this development, what are economists especially looking at in terms of the good and the bad for the country?
Good afternoon, viewers. So I think firstly, we just need to take a step back and just take stock of the past 4 years, just to analyze the economy that Donald Trump is inheriting now, right? The past 4 years, we've seen consumer price inflation at the highest levels experienced in the developed world in the 21st century. We've seen the most aggressive interest rate hikes in history, which has led to an economic slowdown in US. And similar like South Africa, you know, the consumer is under pressure, right? Now, the big thing that has come into question in this past 4 years is the sustainability of the US debt. We also still saw the backdrop last year of a fragile US banking system, which was patched up by the Federal Reserve last year. So the US is still sitting with inflation above the Fed's targets. The US banking system still is showing fragilities. And now you also have the external factor of the expansion of the BRICS that is threatening the dollar hegemony that we have had since, since Bretton Woods, since the 1950s. So Trump is now in a very defensive position, in my opinion, right? So Kamala Harris was trying to boost U.S. government revenue through increasing taxes.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is taking a completely different side. He wants to lower taxes, but to pick up, the slack of the loss of government revenue from taxes, he is aiming to boost tariffs. So in my opinion, I see it as a very defensive stance as the Donald Trump that we saw in 2016. At the end of the day, the US consumer is the one that's going to pick up the tab. That doesn't mean the US is going to stop importing. It just means Donald Trump's administration is going to try to decrease the demand for imported goods. That is essentially the aim of Donald Trump's administration, from what I can see. And they are also taking the stance of decreasing government spending. We saw Elon Musk joining the administration. That's Donald Trump's stance of trying to reduce the U.S. government debt via tariffs and decreasing government spending.
Looking then at what this particular time that Trump comes in, it's at a time where the U.S. Fed, their central bank, is looking to cut interest rates. In fact, Trump has said that Jerome Powell's job, the central bank chair there in the U.S., is one of the easiest in Washington. Clearly not agreeing with the policy stance they've taken. What do you think will happen in terms of interest rates, which are due, I believe, tonight?
So the interest rate, the first 50 basis point cut that we saw in the previous FOMC meeting was quite aggressive. It did take markets a bit on the blind side. But honestly, the Federal Reserve is behind the curve compared to the other developed market central banks. So on paper, the Federal Reserve and the US government have independent policies. So I think we're just going to see a steady 25 basis points cut this evening. And looking at 2016 Trump, he inherited an economy that was actually in a hiking cycle. So now this time around, he's entering his presidency into a cutting cycle. And very interesting to note was this morning, before the SA markets even opened in the Asian Open, the US 10-year yields spiked dramatically. They spiked from 4.2% all the way to 4.4. We're just below 4.5% on the US 10-year yield. And the dollar, or the dollar index, also saw rapid appreciation from the past few weeks, and this morning as well we saw a big jump there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to be a theme of the new Trump presidency, is a strengthening dollar. Now, a strengthening dollar is going to be very negative for African countries, especially the African countries that are sitting with a lot of foreign denominated debt, right? Because when their currencies depreciate against the dollar, it means their borrowing costs increase. And these past 4 years have been extremely rough on Africa. We've seen numerous government debt defaults, specifically Ghana and Ethiopia. We've seen Nigeria is currently sitting with huge inflationary pressures. Kenya recently this year, government expenditures under huge pressure. The IMF had to come in to bail them out, again increasing foreign denominated debt, and which also led to lots of protests and unrest. The previous host on your show is talking about Mozambique. So the African continent is going to face a period of hardship in terms of government finances if the dollar and the US 10-year yields, the longer-term yields on government bonds, keep rising. So that's a theme to keep an eye on.
Now, Trump has also threatened to impose a 200% tariff on some imported cars, saying he's determined in particular to keep cars from Mexico from coming into the U.S. We have the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and we send a lot of cars to the U.S. through that particular preferential trade term. Are you expecting that times will be tough for exporters in the country under that agreement?
Yes. So obviously, like I said, the tariffs won't necessarily immediately hit global supply chains, right? There will be a lagged effect on the effect of these tariffs. Mexico has quite a huge factory base regarding cars. Elon Musk was busy building a factory in the north of Mexico. He canceled his plans because he obviously, joined the Trump administration. He knew what was in the pipeline. He canceled the building of the factory there. So there's definitely going to be negative effects on, for example, the Mexican economy and the South African economy in that regard. And also, you also touched on the EVs earlier in the program, and the Chinese EVs have flooded European markets. And I think Trump is definitely fearful of that. But however, at the end of the day, the tariffs are going to knock the US consumer. Now, if that decreases the US consumer's demand for these imported products, then we will most definitely see a decrease in imports from the US. However, if they decide to stomach that cost, then we won't see as big a shock. But there will be a big lag on the supply chains regarding these tariffs, and yeah, it is going to be negative. But the whole automotive industry is taking stress. In Germany, we've seen Volkswagen mass layoffs for Volkswagen. So I think Trump is kind of seeing the lay of the land and really analyzing the threats of the Chinese production of cars.
Well,
South Africa,
unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I guess we'll talk about the effects on BRICS on another day. But of course, looking at those election results trickle in and looking at the future ahead under a Trump presidency, that was Gustav Fourie, economist looking at the implications for the African economies.